Under a low moon, a beaten girl meets the man who kills monsters with silence. I heard her cry before I saw her, thin and torn like cloth snagged on thorn. The Rio Grande was glass that night, silvered by the moon and whispering low along the reeds. I'd been watching the current for hours, letting its dark carry the noise that still lived inside my skull. Then that cry split the quiet clean in half. He dragged her from the brush, a man too sure of himself, boots sinking into mud that shined like oil. She fought him, weak but wild, her breath snapping in the cold. He raised his hand again, and I saw the shape of him clear against the moon, a shape I'd seen too many times before, over too many bodies. My rifle spoke first, one clean crack. The echo went running down the canyon like it was glad to be free. I didn't aim to kill, just close enough to let him feel death touch his ear. He stumbled, cursed, and fled into the mesquite shadows without looking back. She stayed on her knees, shaking, blood from her temple sliding into the river. When I stepped out from the trees, she flinched like an animal expecting worse. I kept my voice where she could see it, low, calm, and far away, but no words came. I hadn't spoken in near 3 years. The war had taken my voice the same way it took everything, with noise too heavy to set down. They told me it was the blast, the smoke, the blood choking my throat, but I knew better. It was choice. Silence was the one mercy I still owned. I crossed the river barefoot, the cold cutting sharp through me, and lifted her as careful as I could. She was light as a field coat, and her breath came quick and shallow against my chest. I carried her toward the trees where my campfire waited, like a star I hadn't earned. When I set her down beside it, she caught my sleeve. "Don't leave me," she whispered, voice cracked but stubborn. Her eyes were clear even under the swelling. I nodded once. That was all I had. She asked for my name, and I only pointed to my chest, Caleb. She said hers was Abigail, a name too clean for the dirt we sat in. While she drifted near sleep, I cleaned the cut on her face, wrapped it in linen I'd been saving for my own kind of ghosts. She winced but didn't cry. The firelight made her skin look like wet clay, soft and trying to hold shape. When I turned to fetch more water, she murmured, "Why'd you help me?" I looked at her, then at the river. The current took my answer. Behind us, the sound of hoofbeats rolled faint through the night air. Not one rider, 3, maybe 4. The man I'd scared off had fetched their courage back from whatever hole they kept it in. Abigail's hand found mine again, small but sure. She said, "They'll come back." I nodded. I'd already shouldered the rifle. The moon cut a path across the black water, bright enough for ghosts to walk by. I set my back to it and waited.
He spoke only once. "You're safe." It was enough to unmake her fear. Morning found us half buried in the ash of what used to be night. The hoofbeats had vanished before dawn, but I didn't trust silence anymore. I kept my rifle close and my boots near the door. She slept beside the coals, wrapped in my coat, her breath the only steady thing for miles. When she woke, she didn't scream this time, just looked around the cabin, 4 walls of weathered pine and a roof patched with old canvas. I'd built it for dying in peace, not for company. Yet there she was, sitting up slow, touching her bandage with careful fingers. You saved me," she said, voice trembling, like she was testing how words worked again. I didn't answer. I poured her water from the canteen instead. She stared at me a long time, eyes narrowing. "Do you even talk?" I met her gaze, and something in it must have pressed the truth out of me, because the words fell before I could stop them. "You're safe now." The sound startled us both, graveled, thin, like it came from somewhere I'd buried too deep. But her shoulders dropped. The breath she let out was half relief, half disbelief. "Caleb," she repeated, tasting the name I'd traced on my chest the night before. "I'm Abigail." After that, the cabin lived mostly on silentless things. The scrape of a spoon, the hiss of the stove, the river breathing outside the window. I cleaned my instruments each morning, though I hadn't doctored anyone since the war. She watched me do it, curiosity and fear fighting behind her eyes. By the third day, she started moving around on her own, tried to help stack kindling, tried to stir the pot. Her hands trembled, but she did it anyway. Every time our eyes met, she searched for something in me. Reason, pity, maybe just proof that I wasn't another kind of danger. One evening she found my old army jacket hanging by the door. "You were a medic?" I nodded. "Is that why you saved me?" I looked at her then, not her bruises, not the dirt, just her, and shook my head once. She frowned at that, like my silence itself was a riddle she meant to solve. Later that night I found her sitting by the fire, my coat draped over her knees. "If you don't talk, how do I know what you want?" I wanted to tell her that wanting was what ruined men like me, that every word spoken dragged you closer to the ones you'd failed to save. But my throat closed around it, same as always. So instead, I took her bandaged hand and tightened the wrap where it had come loose. She didn't pull away. When she finally lay down again, I watched her breathe until the fire thinned to red coals. Her attackers' tracks were still fresh beyond the ridge. The men who'd hunted her wasn't gone, just waiting for another moon. And when that moon rose again, it would find me standing guard.
15 minutes late, he says. 40 men gone. One of them was my wife. The snow came early that year, soft at first, then cruel. It sealed us in together, me, Abigail, and the quiet we both feared to touch. I'd gone near 4 winters alone before she found her way into my silence. Now there was another rhythm in the cabin, her stitching, her soft humming, the small mercy of footsteps that weren't mine. She asked little. She didn't have to. The dead talk loud enough through the living. One afternoon, while I was out cutting wood, she found the notebook. I knew she had because when I came back, she was sitting by the table with it open, her fingers trembling over the pages. The book was my graveyard. Sketches of torn limbs, blood trails, organ diagrams. Every life I couldn't save drawn so I wouldn't forget how they looked before the light left them. On the back pages were names. The last one written twice. Nora. Abigail looked up, eyes wet but steady. "She was your wife?" I didn't nod or deny it. My hands just found the edge of the table, pressing hard enough to feel bone. "She was stationed near Brown's Crossing," I said at last. The first full sentence I'd spoken in months. My voice felt wrong in the air. I was 15 minutes late, 40 men gone. One of 'em was my wife. She closed the book carefully, like it might bleed if dropped. I'm sorry. The words meant something, but they couldn't touch it. Sorry doesn't change where you stand when you hear the gunfire stop. That night, I drank for the first time since she arrived. A single swallow of rye from a bottle I kept for punishment, not comfort. She watched me from the chair across the fire, face half lit, half shadowed, same as mine. Was it her you were talking to in your sleep? I nodded. She must have loved you to wait. I almost laughed at that, just a short, broken breath that hurt coming out. I said, she waited too long. The fire cracked between us. The smell of pine and smoke hung heavy. Abigail rose, crossed to the table, and closed the notebook, tying the twine back around it. You kept her close, she said. That's not wrong, Caleb. It's just lonely. Then she did something I hadn't expected. She ladled stew into 2 bowls and set one in front of me. Eat. Even ghosts can't live on air. For a while, the only sound was spoons against tin. She never looked up, but I saw her hands shaking. When she finally spoke again, her voice was barely there. The man who hurt me, he said nobody would ever come. I believed him. I watched her then. The scar on her cheek, the way she held herself upright like a soldier who'd survived too long. He was wrong, I said. She smiled at that, small and real. For the first time, my silence felt like something that didn't have to last forever. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that ghosts don't leave easy. And mine were learning how to move again. Outside, the river groaned under the ice, the same way bones do when they're about to break.
He never said he cared. He just put her daisy in a jar. By spring, the thaw had come, and with it a kind of uneasy peace. The cabin no longer felt like a tomb. Abigail filled the silence with her small doings, drying herbs, sweeping corners I'd forgotten, hanging bits of fabric in the window that caught the sun. The place looked less like a bunker and more like a home someone might want to return to. I didn't know how to thank her, so I didn't. I just fixed things, hinges, traps, fences. She'd leave a cup of coffee by my tools without asking. That was how we talked, through what we left behind. One morning, she came back from the river with something clutched tight in her hand. A single white daisy, the first of the year, bending under its own brightness. She set it on the table between us, shy but stubborn. She said, "For the room." I stared at that little flower like it might vanish if I breathed wrong. Then I reached for an old glass jar, filled it with a thumb of water, and set the stem inside. I didn't say a word, but her face softened like I'd written her a poem. After that, small fires lit between us, tiny human sparks. I'd catch her humming while she kneaded dough, or find my coat mended before I knew it was torn. In the evenings, we'd share tea on the porch, watching the river drag the last of the winter ice away. Once, she laughed, really laughed. It startled the night birds and left me staring because I'd forgotten that sound existed. "You can smile, you know," she said, teasing. So I did, clumsy at first, like a man learning how to breathe again. She blushed, turned away, but I saw the corners of her mouth fight to stay calm. Every day I wanted to ask about the men who hurt her, the ones still somewhere out there, but I didn't.
Maybe I was afraid that naming them would break what we'd built. Or maybe I just knew that the river would carry their kind to me soon enough. One evening I found her sketching by the fire with a bit of charcoal. She'd drawn the daisy, just that, and beneath it 2 initials, A and C. When she noticed me watching, she covered the drawing, embarrassed. She said, "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. It was a seed, and I could feel it growing between us. Later, as she slept, I stepped outside. The night smelled of thawed earth and smoke. For the first time since the war, I caught myself imagining tomorrow without dread. Then, from somewhere beyond the ridge, a single distant shot cracked the dark. Not close, not far, but enough to twist the air. Abigail stirred inside, half whispering my name. I reached for the rifle. The daisy quivered in its jar as if it too heard the warning.
"I can build again," he said. "I can't build you." The first torch hit the door just before midnight. The smell of pitch came fast after, thick and hungry. Abigail woke with a gasp, and before her eyes even adjusted, I was already at the window. 3 figures, maybe 4, horses tied off among the pines. Their laughter came hard and ugly, the kind that feeds on fear. "Abigail," one of them called, voice slurred with drink and revenge. "We just want what's ours." Her face drained white. "It's them," she whispered. The second torch arced through the dark and smashed against the shutters. Fire bloomed like it had been waiting all winter to live again. I grabbed the water bucket, but it was too late. The roof crackled, straw catching fast. "Go," I told her, shoving her toward the back door. She shook her head. "Not without you." There wasn't time to argue. I shouldered the rifle, took one clean shot through the window, and heard a man scream, a sound that always meant 2 more were coming. I kicked the door open, smoke swallowing the stars, and pulled her into the night. We ran downhill toward the river, her bare feet slapping against the mud. Behind us, the cabin roared, every memory we'd mended turning to flame. The wind shifted, bringing sparks ahead of us. I shielded her face, but one ember landed on my sleeve, searing through. I didn't feel it until the blood came. We reached the riverbank, and she turned to look back, our home collapsing in orange light, the daisy jar shattering in the window. I dragged her toward the current. "Caleb, you're bleeding," she said, voice breaking. "Not bad," I tried to say, but when I looked down, the dark bloom spreading across my shirt said otherwise. A clean hole through the shoulder. I'd been shot and hadn't even felt the strike. We stumbled across the shallows, water biting cold. Each step took a lifetime. I half fell, half crawled to the far bank, Abigail's arms around me, her breath ragged and wild. "Stay awake," she kept saying. "You stay awake, do you hear me?" I wanted to tell her I'd seen worse, that I'd stitched men back together with less life in them, but my jaw locked and the world went white at the edges. The shouts behind us faded into the fire's roar. Either they thought we burned or they were waiting for daylight to finish the hunt. Didn't matter. I knew they'd be back. Abigail pressed her palm to the wound, whispering prayers that sounded more like defiance. The sky above us turned from smoke to stars. I tasted iron, salt, and the faint sweetness of her hair as she leaned close, trembling. "You saved me once," she said fiercely. "Now it's my turn."
Her voice was the last thing I heard before the cold took me whole and the world narrowed to the sound of the river keeping its secrets.
"You saved me," he whispers. "No," she says. "We saved each other." When the dark broke, I wasn't sure if it was dawn or death. The world swam through a fog of pain and heat. The smell of damp stone told me we were in a cave, river wet, narrow, alive with echo. Abigail's silhouette moved in and out of the firelight, her hair wild, her hands stained red to the wrist. She'd built a small fire near the mouth, used my coat as a blanket. Every few minutes she leaned close, pressing something wet and cool to my wound. I wanted to tell her to stop, that she was wasting her strength, but when I opened my mouth, her finger touched my lips. "Don't," she said. "Not yet." Her voice was steadier than it had any right to be. She'd found my satchel, my old medical kit, and spread the instruments beside her. I saw my own handwriting in the margins of the field manual, pages open where I'd written treatment notes. She was following them, one trembling line at a time. "You remembered," I rasped. She didn't look up. "You drew pictures. I can read pictures." I wanted to laugh, but pain took the sound. The fever climbed higher, and with it came ghosts. At first it was Rachel's face, clear, kind, the way she looked the morning I left for the front. Then her eyes turned hollow, her voice begging from the smoke. "You said you'd come back, Caleb." I tried to answer, but the cave spun, and suddenly it was Abigail kneeling there, her hands pressing against my chest, her breath warm with salt and fear. "Stay with me," she said. "Don't you leave now." The fever dragged me under again. I dreamed of rivers made of gunmetal, of hands reaching but never touching. Somewhere inside it all, I heard Abigail's voice reading the lines I'd written years ago. To save a man, you must first forgive yourself for not saving everyone. When I woke again, the light was dim and the pain duller. Abigail was sitting against the wall, her head on her knees, eyes rimmed and red. "How long?" I asked. "2 days," she said, barely above a whisper. "You talked the whole time." "About what?" She looked away. "About her, Rachel. You said you were sorry." Silence filled the cave until even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Finally, she reached for my hand. She said, "You don't owe the dead forever. You just think you do." Her fingers were warm, real, alive. I turned my palm to meet hers, felt her pulse against mine. "You saved me," I whispered. She shook her head, tears cutting through the soot on her cheeks. "No," she said. "We saved each other." Outside, the wind changed, carrying the faint sound of hoofbeats, distant but sure. Abigail froze, listening. Then she reached for the rifle. "They're coming," she said. I pushed myself up on one elbow, the wound burning. Then we ended. The firelight caught her eyes, fear and fury stitched into one. She nodded once.
"You didn't fix me," she says. "You let me be." We left the cave before first light, moving slow and low along the river's edge. My shoulder was still raw, but Abigail's bandage held firm. Her hands had steadied enough to stitch like a field medic. She carried the rifle now. I carried the quiet. Mist clung to the Rio Grande like a veil. Each breath of it felt like starting over. We followed a deer path until the ground leveled into a sandy bank choked with cottonwood roots. I crouched there, scanning the ridges,
waiting for the men who'd burned our life to ash, but the only sound was the river, steady as a pulse. Abigail knelt beside me. "Why didn't you run when you had the chance?" she asked. I looked at her, at the scar along her cheek, at the way she held the rifle like she'd been born knowing how. I said, "Because I was tired of running, and because you were there." She blinked, eyes bright in the half-light. "You saw me as a soul, not a burden," she murmured. "No one ever did that." Her words sat between us, heavy but clean. We made a small camp by the water, using driftwood for fire. She brewed tea out of some bitter leaf she had foraged, and we sat across from each other, steam rising between our faces. The wound in my shoulder throbbed less now. The wound in my chest, years old and full of ghosts, throbbed different. She reached across the fire, fingers brushing mine. I turned my palm up, caught her hand, held it. It felt like something unspoken, but alive. I said, "I didn't save you either. You walked out of that river yourself." Her mouth twitched like a smile trying to form. Maybe, but I wouldn't have made it this far alone. We stayed that way a long while, the river sliding past, the mist burning off, the world making a sound like breathing. Finally, I said what I'd been afraid to say since the night I fired that first warning shot. "I don't want to lose this." She answered, "You won't, not if we choose it." Her thumb brushed the scar on my knuckles. The fire snapped. Somewhere upriver a hawk cried, its echo carrying far. For the first time since Nora's death, I believed in a tomorrow that wasn't built on running. I believed in something staying. Then Abigail's eyes flicked past me to the ridge. Her hand tightened around mine. "Caleb," she whispered. I turned. In the pale light, 3 riders crested the rise, dark against the brightening sky. We'd been found. I reached for the rifle, but she was already handing it to me. "Not running," she said. "No," I answered, "not running." We rose together, backs to the river that had carried our pain, facing the men who wanted to drag it back.
The river carried them together. This time, it would not take them apart. The sun came up hard that morning, gold on water, sharp on steel. The 3 riders reined at the ridge, eyes sweeping the bank. They were looking for prey, not for ghosts who'd already decided to stand. Abigail stood beside me, calm as I'd ever seen her. She'd tied her hair back, jaw set, the wind pulling smoke from our small fire like a banner. I remember thinking she looked more alive than anyone I'd known. When they called her name, she didn't flinch, just raised the rifle and said, "You already took enough." The first man spurred forward, gun drawn. I waited until he was close enough to see my face, then fired once. His horse reared and he went down hard in the reeds. The second man charged, shouting curses that burned away fast when he saw Abigail standing her ground. She fired next, steady, clean, and he folded without sound. The third turned and ran. I let him go. Some devils you kill, others you leave to rot in your own cowardice. When the echoes faded, all that was left was river wind and breath. Abigail lowered the rifle, her hands shaking now that the danger had passed. I took it from her gently. "It's over," I said. She looked at me, eyes wet, but not from fear. "Then what now?" I glanced at the smoke rising from what used to be our cabin across the water. I said, "We build again, smaller, stronger." And we did. Weeks passed. We hauled timber from the burned ruins, cut fresh boards from the pines.
Every hammer strike sounded like defiance. Abigail planted daisies along the sill, saying they'd find their way to bloom no matter the soil. I didn't argue. She was right. When I opened my old medical kit again, it wasn't to bury the past, it was to use it. Word spread along the river that a doctor lived out by the bend. Folks started coming. Miners with busted hands, mothers with feverish babies, men carrying guilt heavier than their wounds. Abigail helped every one of them, steady as sunrise. Sometimes when the day's work was done, we'd sit by the water in silence. The same silence that used to crush me now felt like peace. She'd rest her head on my shoulder, and the world would feel simple again, like breathing, like forgiveness. One evening, she caught me staring at the rebuilt cabin, smoke curling from the chimney. She asked, "Does it still hurt?" I said, "Some days, but it's quieter now." She smiled, touching my scar. She said, "Maybe that's all healing is." The moon rose pale and patient over the wounded river. Its light caught the daisy in the window, the petals glowing soft against the dark. I took her hand. I whispered, "This time, we stay." And for the first time since the war, I believed it.